Christmas is such a great time. It's filled with great expectations, isn't it? Oh, there's a story told of a wife who had a dream just about a week or so before Christmas. She had this dream, and she woke up and she said to her husband, "Honey, I had this dream that you gave me a gold necklace. What do you think that means?" And the husband said, "Well, Christmas is next week, so maybe you'll find out." Just a couple days go by, and she wakes up again in the middle of the night, and she says, Honey, I had another dream. This dream was where you gave me a pearl necklace. What do you think that means? The husband just smiled, and he said, "Well, Christmas is just around the corner, a few days, maybe you'll find out then." And then Christmas Eve comes, or just before Christmas Eve, pre-Christmas Eve, and she wakes up in the middle of the night, and she says, "Honey, I had another dream where you gave me a beautiful diamond necklace. What does that mean?" The husband just smiled, and he said, "You'll know soon enough." And so Christmas Eve came, and the husband comes home from work late that evening, and he's got a big package all wrapped with a beautiful bow, and he hands it to his wife, and she gets all excited. She can't wait for Christmas morning. So she tears open the package, and she opens the box, and inside is a book. And the book says, "How to Interpret Your Dreams." What you're expecting for Christmas may not happen. So be careful what we're expecting come Tuesday morning, all right? I do have another question for you this morning. Any of you have a cell phone with you? Who has a cell phone? Let me see some hands. Who's got their cell phones with you? There you go. Does anybody have your notifications turned on? So you get the alerts, right? Like the score, your alerts, Facebook posts, the last Instagram picture, right? Some of you may have news or Bible or YouVersion on there, and you get your notification posts, and even though you've turned the ringer off for service, you're still going to get that buzzing and the vibration that alerts you that you have a notification that something's happening in your world and you may need to know about it right away. We've been so overburdened with how we receive messages. All the way back in the 1800s, 1876, I believe, Alexander Graham Bell received the first patent for the first operating telephone. And ever since then, things have gone absolutely crazy, haven't they? Crazy with communication and crazy with getting in touch and being in the know with everything that's happened in the world. I find often when I'm speaking with the youth and youth groups, the subject often turns to somebody trying to figure out what somebody said, why they said it, what was meant by what they said, and our conversation goes all around this communication and trying to understand it. When I sit down with couples who are getting ready to be married, I will tell them that communication is the key. Communication is the key to living a long and happy marriage, and so I encourage them to practice it now and be intentional about it. And then don't ever stop communicating. All the way back into the days of the Garden of Eden, communication has been the foundational key to human relationships, to all of our relationships. So all the way back to the telegraph, to the telephone, all the way up to radio and television, and now through the internet, we have found dozens and dozens of ways to communicate with one another in a more quick fashion, a speedier fashion, a fashion that we don't have to be anywhere or doing anything, and it's always at our fingertips. And we can communicate with anyone, anywhere, at any moment in time. And while that is wonderful, it also comes with a tremendous downside. We are so overloaded by our messages. We are so overloaded by all the information that we receive that it tends to start getting lost in the mix. It tends to start drowning each other out, and pretty soon, instead of receiving messages, we're just receiving noise. There used to be a day when you wanted to communicate with someone over a long distance, you would send them a letter. And then they would wait days or maybe even weeks before they got the letter, and then they'd open it, and then they'd read it. Then we thought we were doing this incredible thing, and we started sending emails, and then we would type out the email, and we would send it, and then we would wait. And the person receiving the email would then open it and read it. But nowadays, we just instant message. We text. We Instagram. We make our conversations shorter than 140 characters. And then when we do, what do? I find people who are staring at their phones. It's like they're staring in front of the microwave, yelling, "Hurry up, hurry up!" And they're waiting for that instantaneous response. It's almost like as if back in the day when we used to be in the same room, looking at one another face to face, talking back and forth. But our communication system has gotten us into a pretty precarious situation. It's got us to where it all seems like noise. And the challenge for us in this day is, how do we communicate more effectively? What is it that we can do so that we can be heard above and beyond all of the noise of today? Teachers and educators are struggling with this. Our emergency response systems are struggling with this. Advertisers, as you know, are trying all sorts of ways to stand out from the rest of the noise that we receive. And yes, even pastors. Even pastors are struggling with, how do we get the communication, the message of love and forgiveness of our Lord to rise above all of the noise that you're hearing? How do we help people to hear the most important message of the world when today the world is in communication overload? Well, in the days of the early Bible, when God wanted to deliver a message to someone, God would send an angel. He would send his own personal messenger. Now today, when we see angels on the front of a Christmas card or in a TV show, usually they're portrayed with beautiful wings and they're floating above the earth. But most of us quickly dismiss those images. We think that they tend to be fictional or imaginary. But in the days of the early Bible stories, when someone came to you and said, "I received a message from an angel," or "I saw an angel," that was serious business. That meant you had received a serious message from God himself. Angels are the messengers of God. And when you received that message, there was no high priority tag along with that. It was that message meant everything in the world to you, and it was understood to be done that way. God used his angels for a very distinct and specific purpose, to send a very personal message to one desired recipient. Because you see, when God sent an angel, God couldn't trust the rest of the world in the way we communicate. He couldn't trust the telegraph. He couldn't trust the scroll. He couldn't trust the text or the IM. God wanted to make sure that message got out and that he got a return receipt. So God sent an angel. Our story today is centered around an angel. The angel's name is Gabriel, and he's only one of a very few angels who actually gets a name in the scriptures. And it may be because Gabriel is not just a Christian angel. And I want you to hear that. Gabriel was not reserved for just those who are Christ followers. Gabriel was started in the Judean religion. He then moved into the Christian religion. And it was Gabriel who was known and quoted as reciting the Quran to Muhammad. Gabriel's message spans across 3 great world religions. And I think there's a symbol in there for us about how there is context and there is connection with the world religions. Gabriel, who is named specifically in our gospel, is also named specifically in the early Testament as well as in the Quran. Leads me to wonder that if God used Gabriel in that way in our history, how might God be using Gabriel in the present or in the future? I believe there's a sign of hope there for all of us. If God can span religions, why can't we? And so God uses Gabriel to speak to Zechariah and Mary, but also Elizabeth and Joseph and shepherds and later wise men. And I wonder if in this overload overloading world that we have, where the messages are coming at us non-stop. Are we listening? Are we listening for the Gabriels amongst us? Are we listening for the voice of God in our lives? Gabriel said to Zechariah, "Do not fear, Zechariah, your prayer has been heard. Elizabeth, your wife, will bear a son by you. You are to name him John." And then almost identically, I don't know if you caught this or not, almost identically, Gabriel goes to Mary and he says what? "Do not be afraid, Mary, for God has found favor with you." And then later, after Jesus is born and the angels go out to the shepherds in the field, what do the angels say to the shepherds? The very first thing they say to them is, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all people." Now we have to wonder, why is the angel's message always starting with, "Do not be afraid"? Is it because they believe that the people who are hearing from the angel are afraid because there's an angel in their midst? Even though we already know the angels are widely accepted when they're out. They're widely accepted during these times of the early Bible stories. They're even revealed as something that you can take great honor and pleasure that an angel came to you. So is it that they were afraid that the angel was in their midst? Or is it because the angel knew they were living in fear? Did the angel come to these people who were recipients of God's message with the understanding that their days were harsh, that their lives were tough, and that their daily struggle is what was distracting them from the ability to hear God's message? And so before they could even hear the message, Gabriel knows that he has to first find them in a sense of peace. And he says to them, "Do not be afraid." I have to wonder, is that you and I today? In 2018? Have we been so over-communicated, so overloaded, so overburdened, and so filled with stress and worry that we've been completely distracted to hearing God's message for us? We're 48 hours from Christmas. And I know there's a lot of talk about the craziness and the stress and the to-do list that never seem to end. I know that when we sing hustle and bustle, we actually have frowns on our faces about just how crazy this time of year can be. I know for some of us, the emotional drain of just getting together with family wears us down and even causes some of us to get physically sick. I know there's those of us who dread the day after Christmas because that's when the bills start pouring in. And the financial stress of just meeting all of the burdens of keeping up with the Joneses at this time of year, it causes us to be more and more and more distracted. And the noise of the holiday begins to fill our ears, and we simply are unable to hear God's message for us. Perhaps some of us are even longing to go back to Egypt. Perhaps some of us would rather go back to the way our lives used to be, even if it was without God, or if it was filled with poison, or if it was filled with addictions, or if it was filled with oppression, or if it was filled with despair and distraction. We'd rather go back there because at least then we know what it looks like. Because we're fearful of the unexpected. We're fearful of the unknown. And perhaps we're even fearful that God may call us somewhere else. He may call us to leave our flock and go somewhere else. He may call us to give up our riches and go somewhere else. He may call us to do a duty in our life that seems totally unexpected, and we may think, I'm too old, or I'm too busy, or I'm not educated enough, and we come up with all these reasons why we can't do things. And God's message comes to us, and He says, do not be afraid. And the question is, are we listening? Especially this time of year when our to-do lists are so long and Christmas is just a few hours away and everything's been set. You already have your Christmas dinner menu set. You've already got most of your shopping done, or you're going to have it done by tomorrow night, and you know that you're going to be wrapping at certain hours of the night. Wait until the wee morning hours. We know that we're going to be spending time with family and friends over the next week, and then there will be preparations for New Year's. We know all this is coming. And we know that January 2nd, we're going to be right back in the saddle again, doing exactly the same thing that we did December 23rd. But what if all that didn't go as you planned? What if something completely unexpected happens? What about God who interrupts our lives? What about God who comes in and does the most unexpected things? What about God who completely catches us off guard? What about the God who went to Zechariah and said, "You're going to have a baby"? What about the God who came to Mary and said, "You're going to have a baby"? What about the God who called people away from their livelihoods and their friends and their families and said, "Come and do this great work for me"? What about the God who says, "I have something brand new for you"? I wonder, are we ready to trust in that message? Are we opening to listening and hear it, but then are we open to trust in that message and know that that message was meant specifically for us? That God delivered an angel in whatever form he does, and that that message is meant just for you. And that message is an invitation. It's an invitation for you to trust that he knows what he's doing with your life. And that he's inviting you to some bigger and greater story. The angel says to Zechariah, who even has the audacity to question the angel says, "I am Gabriel. I am the sentinel of God. I was sent especially for you, to bring you this glad news. Every word I've spoken to you will come true in time, God's time." Now, I don't know if you caught that when we read the scriptures earlier, and maybe you were like me and you read over the whole thing because we already expect the story. We already know the story, so we kind of rush to the end. But not only does Gabriel say, "What I have told you in this message will definitely come true," because it's a promise by God, and God never goes back on his promises, and so it's a guarantee, the best guarantee you've ever received in your life. But not only that, but it will happen in God's time. Not in yours. Not in Zechariah's. Not in Elizabeth, who thought she was too old. Not in Mary and Joseph, who thought they were too young. Not in the wise men who had to leave. Not in the shepherds who left and went. But in God's time. And by God's message, we receive an invitation. It's an invitation to hear him and then trust in his timeline. And it may be something completely unexpected. In fact, I would go so far as to say you can count on it. It won't be in our time frame, but in his. And so I believe these same forces that are pulling us away from God's message and pulling us away from hearing God and spending time with God and building the trust that we need to build in that is what is impacting our inability to hear him. Trust. All the way back to the Garden of Eden. It's a foundational block to building relationships. The angel says, "Do not be afraid." Do not be afraid. Put aside the things in this world that are separating you from God. Put away the things that are distracting you from God. If you're receiving too many emails and too many texts and talking to too many people and spending too much time, that you're someone who says, "I can't go to church, I have to go shopping." If you're someone who says, "I can't read scripture, I'm too busy reading my text and checking my Facebook posts." If you're someone who says, "I'm working 2, 3, and 4 jobs to try and keep everything together," know that God has a better message for you. And he's asking us to just listen. and then trust in that message. There's a very contemporary story of this exact same thing. It just started on TV. It's a new TV show called God Befriended Me. It's like the 21st version of how God communicates. And I don't know if you've seen this show or not, but it's a pretty simple plot and a pretty simple story. There's a young man who's very intelligent, he's very optimistic in the world, but he does not believe in God. He has his own podcast. It's like what used to be a radio show many years ago, but now we call them podcasts. And he spouts off on his podcast about what he believes and his own personal thoughts and ideas about the world. Until one day he gets a social media friend request. And it comes from someone by the name of God. And so, of course, being an atheist, he just doesn't believe in it. He thinks someone's trying to play a trick on him. How could God be trying to do that? And yet you and I today would probably say, well, God works in unexpected ways. But Miles doesn't see that, and he thinks it's a joke, and so he continues to get these constant friend requests. They call it poking, I believe. And he keeps getting these friend requests. And so finally he gets curious and he decides to accept. And the messages that come from this friend are messages about people's names and places. They're calling him to go out and meet people and help people where they are. And over the series, he begins to build friendships with people he never would have met before. And then towards the end of the season, he then learns something that changes his life. And you don't have to be a follower of Christ or God to know that the plot of this story is about how God changes people's lives. If we'll just listen. Now I know you may not get a visit from an angel. But I'm pretty sure you're going to get an unexpected text. Or an unexpected phone call. An unexpected word from a family or a friend over the holidays. You may get an unexpected word from a complete stranger on the street, or a store clerk in a store, or someone that you bump into in the hallways of the mall or out in a parking lot. And those are the messages that you're just going to pause for a quick second and you're going to think, how did they know? Well, how did God know? How does God know the messages that we need? And the question for us is, have we cleared out all the clutter and all the over-communication in our lives so that we can hear that? Have we prepared our hearts to receive that? And are we repeatedly listening so that we can build the trust and build the relationship? And then are we willing to do exactly what all the stories that we've been reading about and all the characters have been doing? Following his message. Because the message of God is incredibly complex until he breaks it down for us. And he invites us to play in one little part of a very large, greater story. You know, Zechariah and Elizabeth, they gave birth to John, and I'm sure they didn't know what that meant for the entire story of Scripture. John the Baptist, who announced Jesus' ministry. He came to Mary and Joseph to raise a baby boy, and I doubt they understood the complexity and all of it wrapped with the story and the birth of Jesus Christ. But here we are 2018 years later. I'm sure when the shepherds heard the message and started to get up and walk, they didn't understand that they would then be proclaiming the good news to all the people in the land. All of these Advent stories, they're chapters of the greatest book. They're acts in the greatest play ever done. They are scenes from the greatest movie ever produced. They are parts to the greatest story ever known. And the message God has for you invites you to play your role in that. So what is your part in the greatest story ever told? Because you don't want to miss out on being part of the greater whole. Amen.
This is my lovely friend Joyce Mayer. She's a retired deacon with the United Methodist Church, and she does something called Praise in Motion. So some of you have maybe seen something like this, and some of you may have not. but it's a really cool way, a little different way to praise the Lord. And she's taken the last probably 4 or 5 weeks and worked with our kids and has put together this beautiful praise in motion. The candles may not be lit this morning, but they are representative of the light of the world. The song they're going to be doing this morning is called The Angel Song by Jackie Velasquez, so I hope you enjoy it.
Of a silhouette mountains, I am amazed that the God who made all this made me. As my eyes were open, I began to believe. The mystery of Christmas was truly revealed. A great host of angels came calling to me, taking me back to the pure sacred peace. Singing la 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 la. There's a Savior born to us today. Singing la 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 la. The Messiah, God is the Lord.